There is a signal traveling through your body right now, a quiet, persistent signal that most people over 60 have learned to live with, or have been told is simply part of getting older. That tingling in your hands, that numbness that creeps into your fingers without warning, that strange sensation, like a low electrical hum running just beneath the skin. If you've felt it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And if you've asked your doctor about it and walked away without a real answer, what I'm about to share may be the most important thing you hear this year. I've spent decades working with patients over 60, and I can tell you, with absolute certainty, that what most people are told about this kind of tingling and what's actually causing it are two very different things. The conventional explanation barely scratches the surface. And the gap between those two things is where millions of people are suffering right now, completely unnecessarily. So stay with me, because what I'm about to walk you through is not something your doctor will cover in a routine appointment. It's not something the pharmaceutical industry has any interest in broadcasting, but it is something the research supports. And it's something I have watched change lives in my own clinical experience. Let's start with what you're actually feeling. That tingling in your hands. It doesn't come on all at once. It starts subtly. Maybe you noticed it first at night, when everything was quiet and you couldn't ignore it. A faint buzzing in the fingers. Then it spreads. It moves into the palms, maybe down into the feet. You wake up in the morning and your hands feel like they've been wrapped in something. Thick, distant, not quite yours. You reach for your coffee cup and you have to look at your hand to make sure you've got it, because you can't quite feel the grip the way you used to. You button your shirt, and the buttons feel strange, unfamiliar, small things, but they add up. And then there's the other side of it, the burning. Some of my patients describe it as standing on hot sand. Others say it's more like a low, persistent fire that runs from the ankle to the knee. Worst at night. Worst when they're trying to sleep. They move their feet. They take their socks off. They hang their feet off the edge of the bed, just looking for relief. Some nights, nothing works. The burning just sits there, and you lie in the dark wondering whether this is what the rest of your life is going to feel like. I've watched patients stop gardening because of this. I've watched people who love to walk on the beach stop going. I've watched men and women who raised families, who worked for decades, who took care of everyone around them, quietly start holding on to walls when they walk, quietly start avoiding stairs, quietly start declining invitations because they don't trust their own balance anymore. And they don't say anything, because they don't want to worry their children, because they don't want to be a burden, because some part of them is hoping it will just stop. It won't stop on its own. And here's what makes this even more serious. And I'll get to the why in just a moment. It tends to progress, slowly, silently. And by the time most people take it seriously, the window for meaningful intervention has narrowed considerably. I've seen patients who were told for years that this was just aging, that there was nothing to be done. They were handed a prescription, gabapentin, Lyrica, sometimes both, and sent home. And those medications do something. They dampen the sensation. They quiet the signal, for a while, but they don't touch the underlying problem, not even close. And what most people aren't told is that long-term use of those drugs can make concentration difficult, can impair balance, which is already compromised by the nerve damage itself, and can create a dependence that's hard to reverse. I've watched patients on those medications fall. I've watched their quality of life decline, even as the prescription stayed the same. That is not treatment. That is management of a symptom while the cause goes unaddressed. If what I'm sharing today is new to you, and I suspect it is, make sure you subscribe to this channel. I release critical health information for people over 60 every week. Information your doctor may not have time to share in a routine appointment. Hit the subscribe button below. It costs nothing, and it could be one of the most important health decisions you make today. Now, let me tell you what is actually happening. What the research increasingly points to, and what I have seen borne out again and again in clinical practice, is that this tingling, this burning, this creeping numbness is not just aging. It is the result of a specific, identifiable, and addressable breakdown happening inside the nervous system. And it starts with something most people have never heard of in this context. Your peripheral nerves, the nerves that run from your spinal cord out to your hands, your feet, your skin, are wrapped in a protective coating called the myelin sheath. Think of it like the rubber insulation around an electrical wire. When that insulation is intact, signals travel cleanly, quickly, accurately. You touch something hot, and your brain knows immediately. You feel the ground beneath your feet, and your balance adjusts automatically. Everything works the way it's supposed to. But when the myelin sheath begins to deteriorate, when that insulation starts to break down, the signals get distorted. They leak. They misfire. And you feel that as tingling, as burning, as numbness, as the sensation that something is wrong but you can't quite name what. Now here's the critical piece. What the research suggests, and this is a body of evidence that has been building for years, is that this deterioration is not simply inevitable. It is, in many cases, driven by a specific deficiency that becomes dramatically more common after the age of 60. And that deficiency is one that the medical system is remarkably bad at catching. Vitamin B12, not just low B12, severely depleted B12. The kind of depletion that develops slowly over years, and that standard blood tests often miss, because the reference ranges used in most labs were not designed with nerve health in mind. Here's why this matters so much. Vitamin B12 is not optional for nerve function. It is structurally required for the production and maintenance of that myelin sheath I described. Without adequate B12, the insulation breaks down. The signals distort, and you feel it exactly the way I've been describing. What the research also shows is that after 60, the stomach's ability to absorb B12 from food drops dramatically, sometimes by 40% or more. And for the millions of people taking metformin for blood sugar management, the situation is even worse. Metformin actively interferes with B12 absorption. This has been documented in published research for years, and yet the vast majority of patients on metformin are never told to monitor their B12 levels, never supplemented proactively. They just keep depleting, slowly, and the tingling gets worse, and nobody connects the dots. Researchers at institutions studying peripheral neuropathy have documented what happens when this deficiency is addressed, when patients are given not just any B12, but the specific methylated form called methylcobalamin, which the research suggests is far more bioavailable to nerve tissue than the standard cyanocobalamin found in most cheap supplements. The difference in tissue penetration is not subtle. Cyanocobalamin has to be converted by the body before it can be used by nerve cells. Many people over 60 have reduced ability to make that conversion efficiently. Methylcobalamin skips that step entirely. It is the form the nervous system actually uses, and the studies looking at its effects on peripheral nerve function are some of the most compelling in this field. But here's what makes this even more serious, and I want you to stay with me for this. B12 is not the only piece. Because in my years of working with patients who present with exactly these symptoms, I've found that addressing the deficiency alone is rarely enough. The reason is that the deterioration doesn't just involve nutrient depletion. It also involves oxidative damage, decades of accumulated cellular stress, attacking the mitochondria inside nerve cells, disrupting energy production at the cellular level. And for that, B12 has a companion that most people have never heard of: alpha-lipoic acid. Alpha-lipoic acid is a naturally occurring antioxidant with a very specific property. Unlike most antioxidants, it is both water-soluble and fat-soluble, which means it can penetrate into nerve cell tissue in ways that standard antioxidants cannot. The research on its role in peripheral nerve support is extensive. What it does, in simplified terms, is neutralize the oxidative damage accumulating inside nerve cells. The damage that, left unaddressed, continues to erode function, even when the B12 deficiency is corrected. These two compounds work together. One rebuilds the structural environment the nerve needs. The other defends the cellular machinery from ongoing damage. I had a patient, I'll call him Frank, 71 years old, retired, came to see me after 3 years of worsening tingling in both hands and what he described as a constant low-level burning in his feet that made sleep nearly impossible. He had been to his primary care doctor. He had been to a neurologist. He had been prescribed gabapentin, which he stopped because it left him foggy and unsteady on his feet. He told me he had tried B12 supplements from the drugstore and felt nothing. What he hadn't been told was that those supplements were cyanocobalamin, the form his body was struggling to convert. We shifted him to methylcobalamin, added alpha-lipoic acid at a therapeutic dose. And within a few weeks, he came back and said the burning at night had begun to ease. He was sleeping again. Not perfectly, but again. That was the first thing, the sleep. Then gradually, the tingling began to quiet. I want to be precise here. I am not telling you there is a cure. I am telling you what the research suggests and what I have observed, that the peripheral nervous system has a capacity for recovery when given the specific nutritional support it has been lacking. And that capacity is real. There is also a third compound worth understanding, acetyl L-carnitine. This amino acid derivative supports energy production inside nerve cells. Essentially, it helps provide the fuel that damaged nerves need to begin the repair process. Clinical studies have looked at its effects on peripheral nerve function in specific populations, and the findings are consistent with what I've seen in practice. Nerves that have been under metabolic stress for years need more than just the right structural materials. They need energy. Acetyl L-carnitine supports exactly that. This isn't a conspiracy. I want to be clear about that. The reason most of this information doesn't reach you through the conventional medical system is structural, not malicious. A standard appointment is 10, maybe 15 minutes. The training emphasis is on diagnosis and prescription. Nutritional biochemistry at this level of detail is rarely covered in medical school with the depth it deserves. And the compounds I'm describing, methylcobalamin, alpha-lipoic acid, acetyl L-carnitine, they're not patented. There is no pharmaceutical revenue attached to recommending them. So they remain in the literature, studied and documented, while millions of patients are handed prescriptions for drugs that address the symptom and leave the cause untouched. I've put together a short presentation that goes much deeper into everything I've covered today. It includes specific approaches that I've seen work for patients in exactly this situation. The link is in the description below. Watch it when you have a quiet moment. I think it's going to answer a lot of questions you didn't even know you had. Think about what this tingling has already taken from you. The nights you've lain awake, the walks you've shortened, the things you've stopped doing quietly without telling anyone because you didn't trust your hands or your balance the way you once did. The grandchildren you've held back from picking up off the floor, not because you don't want to, but because you don't trust that you'll be able to get back up. That is not a small thing. That is your life. And it is happening in ways that compound slowly, invisibly, until one day you look back and realize how much ground has been lost. Your nervous system is not a fixed system. That is the thing I most want you to take away from today. The research is clear on this. With the right nutritional support, with the right forms of the right compounds, the peripheral nervous system has a demonstrated capacity to begin recovering. Not overnight, not all at once, but meaningfully, in ways that patients describe as feeling their feet again after years of numbness, sleeping through the night for the first time in years, walking without holding on to the wall. You are not powerless here. You were never powerless. You just weren't given the right information. And now you have it. If today's video opened your eyes to something important, share it with someone you care about. Because there are millions of people over 60 dealing with this silently, and they don't have to. The short presentation in the description goes even deeper. I highly recommend watching it when you have a quiet moment. Subscribe for more critical health information every week, and leave a comment below. What was the most surprising thing you learned today? I read every single one.